This is Bloomberg. I'm David Weston. From the beginning, President Trump's push for tax reform has been part of his agenda to grow the U.S. economy faster. And Republicans on Capitol Hill have supported him. Back in May, Senator Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania wrote in a Bloomberg View piece, quote, "Americans are rightly fed up with the feeble growth of recent years. Dramatic pro-growth tax reform will enable us to return to the robust growth that is normal for America." Senator Toomey, a member of the Senate Finance Committee, joins us now from Washington. Welcome back to Bloomberg. Good to have you, Senator.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So I read your statement yesterday in support of this plan, or at least the outlines of a plan, again talking about growth. What I think we would like to really understand is how, if this plan goes forward along the lines it suggested, it will directly lead to economic growth. I understand while it will lead to increased value for investors, but what about the growth in the economy?
Yeah, it's a great question. Because this is not a demand-side attempt to sort of goose consumer purchases for a day or a week or a month or whatever you might be able to hope for if you went down that road. Instead, this entire tax reform is designed to create incentives to encourage the expansion of the productive capacity of the American economy. That's what generates sustainable growth, higher wages, and a better standard of living. I could give you several ways in which it does that. One of the most dramatic, I think, is a movement to allowing full expensing for capital expenditures. So when a business goes out and buys new equipment, they're going to be able to deduct the full cost of that equipment the year they buy it. We're going to get rid of the long depreciation schedules that make it much more expensive for business to buy the equipment they need. That one step alone is going to encourage business to spend more capital, to buy more equipment. And as you know, it's equipment and innovation that comes with it that makes people more productive, that expands the productive capacity of a company and therefore the economy, and that leads to wages. That's one of the most pro-growth elements. But lower marginal rates also create a higher incentive to risk money, to start a new business, to expand an existing business. And wiping out some of the distortions gets rid of the economically suboptimal way that we allocate capital in response to the tax code. So those are at least three ways that I'm really confident we're going to be encouraging more growth.
Yeah, and that's very helpful. I dare say there's no one, certainly in business and financial markets, economists who would disagree with the need to have more capital investment in order to get productivity up. At the same time, do you have access to information either from your staff there in Capitol Hill or from the White House that was suggested that expensing is the thing that's keeping companies from making those capital investments? After all, it's very inexpensive to borrow money right now. Companies have record amounts of cash on their balance sheet. They've got record earnings. Wouldn't they be doing it already?
Yeah, capital is very inexpensive and debt is very low cost if you are a large company that can access the capital markets. But if you are a mid-sized company or a small company, you don't have access to the capital markets. And it's not necessarily that easy to borrow the money. And expensing is a much more attractive opportunity. And by the way, you might be as leveraged as you can get already, and more leverage might not be a good idea. But the expensing, just allowing the tax treatment to follow the cash flow, this is no giveaway. This is no special favor. We're simply saying when a business goes out and buys something, that the tax returns can reflect what they did that year. So yes, the shorter answer is yes, there is a lot of data that suggests full expensing encourages more investment.
There's also data that points to the fact that it doesn't. Unicredit had a great stat out that says in the UK, they had a 30% corporate tax rate in 2007. It's 19% now, but the British investment to GDP share today is actually lower than it was in 2007. Your response?
Yeah, I don't know all the other moving parts that must have been occurring at the same time. I have no idea what the net effect is. I don't study the British economy that closely. But I can tell you that all else being equal, at any point in time, a movement to expensing, and I think you were referring then to a marginal rate reduction.
Yeah.
But a movement to expensing, I think, absolutely encourages more capital investment. And I think lower marginal rates encourages investment generally. Look, there are always other things happening in an economy, but at this point, I think both of these steps will be very constructive. Keeping in mind, by the way, that we've got the highest corporate tax rate in the industrialized world by a big margin.
Senator, I'm glad you brought that up, because if you look at the effective tax rate, 250 companies just paid 21.2% between 2008 and 2015, which for them means a 1% reduction in the tax rate, which really equals like $1 in profit, according to Goldman Sachs. That's not a big difference.
Yeah, the fact is, you're absolutely right. The effective average rate is always lower than the top marginal rate. That's true in the United States, but it's also true in the rest of the world. And when the OECD average marginal rate is 22.3%, which it is, the effective rate for European companies is considerably lower than that. So we are still at a competitive disadvantage, and I don't want American business and workers to continue to be at that competitive disadvantage.
Senator, there's going to be a one-off levy on the money held abroad, the foreign earnings of many of the United States companies. And I just wonder, what are the goals, the objective of that particular policy?
Yeah, so the goal is to kind of, the way I think about it is the international piece, right? How we treat the income earned by subsidiaries of U.S.-based multinationals. The goal is to move to a territorial system where we no longer tax global income, but really adopt what the rest of the industrialized world has done, a system where overseas subsidiaries pay their tax locally, and after they've done that, they can bring that money home without any additional penalty. So that's where we want to get to. That is going to be scored by government, account keepers as losing revenue. And so we're going to have a one-timed, what we call a deemed repatriation. We're going to look at the accumulated historical profits, assign a modest tax to that number. That will then offset the foregone revenue prospectively, and we end up with a system that is as competitive as the rest of the world, getting rid of the incentive for inversions, getting rid of the competitive advantage that European companies have when it comes to acquiring other companies. It's going to be a much better system.
Senator, that money historically has been brought home. The last time we had a repatriation holiday, a one-off levy, and it was used for buybacks and dividends. Do you have an objective for the policy, for where the cash will actually be used? Because ultimately that's probably where it's going to go.
We don't know where it's going to go. And in fact, if we marry this with other good incentives like the expensing that I mentioned, there'll be a greater incentive to invest that in capital items than there would be in the absence of that reform. So keep in mind, this is not happening in isolation. It's happening in the context of a broader reform. But, it's not for us to direct the resources of a business, right? What we should do is create the most rational, sensible, competitive tax code, and then let the leaders of the business decide how to allocate their resources.
Finally, Senator, we've talked to you before, and you've indicated you are at least dubious that you'll get any Democrats to go along with this plan ultimately. We just talked with Mark Short from the White House, legislative director, and he said that they really will want to get this bipartisan. Is there a difference of approach on this between the White House and the Congress, the way we saw in the debt ceiling discussions?
No, there's not a difference in approach. There might be a difference in opinion about how some of my colleagues will approach this. And look, I'd be delighted to be wrong. If the Democrats want to work with us, that's terrific. And we're going to have a process that's going to be wide open, the ordinary, regular order of the way the Senate works. We're going to go through committee. All the Democrats on the committee will have unlimited opportunity to offer amendments, to persuade us of how they would like to approach things. It'll be on the floor. It'll be open to amendments. So I'd love to be proven wrong. Let's see.
Sounds like that will make Senator McCain very happy, your colleague.
It should. This is a completely normal, ordinary process.
Okay. Thank you so much, Senator. That's Senator Pat Toomey, Republican of Pennsylvania.